Bruce Willis was once the embodiment of invincibility. From Die Hard to The Sixth Sense, he wasn't just a Hollywood action star, and he was the action star. Tough, witty, unshakable. But behind the smirk and bulletproof image was a man whose battle wasn't just fought on screen. In recent years, heartbreaking news has surfaced, and it has left fans around the world reeling. The once commanding voice, the sharp wit, the steady presence, all of it slowly dimming under the weight of a devastating diagnosis. The announcement hit like a thunderclap. Bruce Willis was stepping away from acting. Permanently. The reason? A rare and cruel condition called frontotemporal dementia, a neurological disease that slowly robs a person of language, understanding, and self. For a man who made a career out of quick one-liners and razor-sharp timing, the irony was almost unbearable. And the tragedy? Even deeper. But this isn't just a story about illness. It's a story about love, about resilience, and about how a family stepped in when the cameras stopped rolling. From his ex-wife Demi Moore to his daughters and current wife Emma Hemming Willis, those closest to Bruce have rallied around him in a way that's moved millions to tears. What caused the decline? When did the signs begin? And what is Bruce's life really like now, far from the sound stages of Hollywood? This is the tragic truth behind the legend. And once you hear what's really happening, you'll never see Bruce Willis the same way again. For decades, Bruce Willis was Hollywood's Iron Man, the wisecracking, smirking, unstoppable force that anchored one blockbuster after another. But those who watched closely began to notice something long before the official announcement. Something subtle, a hesitation in his voice, a quiet look of confusion, flubbed lines that never would have made it past his old standards. It wasn't a bad performance. It was something else, something off. The kind of quiet unraveling that didn't scream, but whispered. And for those who had admired him for so long, the whispers grew louder with each appearance. In 2019 and 2020, Bruce began taking on a series of small, low-budget films. To outsiders, it seemed puzzling. Why would a star of his magnitude, a legend with more than 30 years of box office dominance, suddenly dive into back-to-back productions with barely any promotion? The answer, we now know, was far more tragic than anyone expected. Behind the scenes, those close to the actor had already begun noticing a steep decline. According to directors and crew members, Bruce was having trouble remembering lines, not just complex dialogue, but even basic cues. Earpieces were introduced to feed him lines during takes. Scenes were shortened, scripts rewritten, and gradually, the once commanding presence began to recede into something quieter, but the world didn't know yet. Fans still believed in the myth of Bruce Willis, tough, unshakable, untouchable. And that's exactly how he wanted it. For Bruce, who had spent his life building a persona of strength, showing vulnerability was not an option. He kept working, kept showing up, but each performance came at a cost. He was fighting not just to act, he was fighting to hold on to who he was. Family members, especially his wife Emma and his daughters, were the first to truly grasp what was happening. In private, they watched the man they loved begin to fade. Moments of forgetfulness turned into long pauses. Conversations began to stall. There were days when Bruce seemed entirely like himself, full of energy, humor, and charisma. And then there were days when he wasn't. Days when the mask slipped, and the cracks beneath the surface could no longer be hidden. At first, doctors were uncertain. The symptoms mimicked many other conditions, but eventually, the diagnosis came with painful clarity: frontotemporal dementia, a cruel disease that affects speech, behavior, memory, and comprehension. And unlike Alzheimer's, it often strikes younger and progresses faster. When the public announcement was made in 2022, it wasn't just heartbreaking, it was jarring. For millions, Bruce Willis had been a symbol of defiance in the face of chaos. To see him brought low by something invisible and unrelenting felt like watching a fortress crumble from within. But behind the scenes, there had been years of quiet suffering, of trying to make sense of what was happening to a man who had spent his life in control. The lights didn't go out all at once. They flickered, dimming slowly over time until the man who once lit up every room began slipping into shadows he couldn't escape. And though Bruce never said the words publicly, his actions spoke volumes. The walk-offs, the quiet goodbyes, the final curtain calls wrapped in silence. It wasn't the end of a career. It was the beginning of the hardest chapter of his life. As Bruce Willis's condition worsened, the spotlight he once commanded began to turn into a burden, something too bright, too harsh for the reality unfolding behind closed doors. While fans speculated and tabloids whispered about his sudden shift in roles, a different kind of story was being written far away from the cameras, one of quiet heartbreak, unconditional love, and a family learning to navigate the slow disappearance of the man they all knew so well. This wasn't a PR crisis. This was a human crisis. And those closest to Bruce were the only ones who could truly understand the cost of what was happening. Emma Hemming Willis, Bruce's wife since 2009, became more than just a partner. She became his anchor. With 2 young daughters, she suddenly found herself carrying the weight of not just their family, but of protecting Bruce from a world that couldn't see what was really going on. Behind her calm and poised public appearances was a woman quietly watching her husband fade in real time. She saw the subtle changes before anyone else. The repetition, the confusion, the blank stares in moments that once would have made him laugh. And she knew this wasn't just aging. This was something else, something they couldn't fight with strength or stubbornness. She started managing his schedule, accompanying him to sets, ensuring scripts were simplified, whispering lines. But no amount of support could stop what was coming. And then there was Demi Moore, Bruce's ex-wife, lifelong friend, and the mother of his 3 eldest daughters. Despite their divorce years earlier, Bruce and Demi had remained remarkably close. In fact, their relationship became a symbol of what love could look like after the romance ends, a deep, respectful bond that remained rooted in family. When the diagnosis came, Demi didn't hesitate. She showed up. She supported Emma. She spent time with Bruce. Their daughters, Ruma, Scout, and Tallulah, all rallied together, choosing unity over grief, compassion over fear. They didn't turn away. They leaned in. Publicly, they shared glimpses of strength, smiling family photos, warm birthday tributes, loving captions. But behind the scenes, it was far more complicated. Watching the man they loved, the one who once carried them on his shoulders and made them laugh with wild impressions, slowly lose his ability to speak and express himself was devastating. For his daughters, it was like losing their father in fragments. One memory at a time, one word at a time. Still, they made a decision as a family. If Bruce couldn't be the storyteller anymore, they would tell his story for him, with grace, with dignity, and without shame. They released carefully worded statements about his retirement and diagnosis. They asked for understanding. And most importantly, they asked for compassion, not sympathy, not sensationalism, just kindness. Because the man behind John McClane, behind the bravado and the action, was still there. Maybe quieter, maybe different, but still there. They also made another choice, to surround him not with sadness, but with love. To fill his days with music, nature, old memories, and the warmth of family. Because even as the disease continued to take from him, there was still something it couldn't touch. The love they all shared, and the quiet knowing that Bruce Willis, even in silence, was still their hero. In a perfect world, Bruce Willis's legendary career would have ended with grace, a final, carefully chosen performance, a standing ovation, and a curtain call worthy of his decades on screen. But that's not what happened. Instead, as his health declined and his clarity faded, Bruce continued to appear in film after film, sometimes in 5, 6, even 8 movies per year. To the average fan, it was confusing. Why was one of the most iconic stars of the 20th century suddenly showing up in low-budget, straight-to-streaming action flicks with minimal dialogue and barely any promotion? The truth, as it later came to light, was far more tragic than most could imagine, and it exposed a dark undercurrent of exploitation in an industry that often puts profit over people. By 2020, insiders were already whispering about Bruce's health behind the scenes. Directors and crew members on set described a man who could no longer memorize lines, who appeared lost between takes, who sometimes needed entire scenes rewritten to accommodate his condition. In one particularly jarring report, a filmmaker admitted they were instructed to shoot Bruce's scenes first, quickly, and with as few takes as possible, because he simply couldn't keep up. Earpieces were introduced to feed him lines. Dialogue was cut down to single words or phrases. But the films kept rolling. Why? Because his name still sold movies. Even in his vulnerable state, Bruce Willis was a brand, a recognizable name that could boost a budget and guarantee international sales. So producers kept calling, agents kept booking, and Bruce, struggling with early dementia symptoms, likely didn't fully understand what was happening. He was trusting the people around him, the people he had worked with for years, to protect him. But instead of stepping in to slow things down, many just kept the machine running. The result was heartbreaking. Fans began noticing something was wrong. In these late-career films, Bruce's energy was gone. His famous wit dulled. He appeared wooden, tired, barely present. Critics panned the performances, not knowing the man on screen was battling a disease that was already stealing his words and understanding. The backlash was swift and cruel. Accusations of laziness, questions about whether he even cared anymore. All the while, Bruce kept showing up, quiet, compliant, and heartbreakingly unaware that he was becoming a shadow of himself on screen. It wasn't until 2022, when the family finally released the truth, that Bruce had been diagnosed with aphasia, and later frontotemporal dementia, that the full picture began to emerge. And when it did, there was outrage. Not at Bruce, but at those who had profited from his decline. His longtime collaborator, Randall Emmett, came under fire for allegedly continuing to cast Bruce, despite knowing he was cognitively impaired. Some crew members even claimed Bruce looked confused during filming, asking, "I know why you're here, but why am I here?" It was a moment of reckoning for Hollywood, or at least it should have been. Because while aging stars often face quiet exits, Bruce's decline was anything but private. It was packaged, sold, and streamed, while the man himself was disappearing from within.
And the most painful part?
He trusted the very system that had built him, to take care of him when he couldn't care for himself. But in the end, it wasn't the industry that saved Bruce. It was his family, the people who saw the truth, stepped in, and finally said, "Enough."